Hey Photo World, can we make your photo go from this to this with just using levels? Let's find out. Hey Photo World, I'm Rob Kruger. This is Take and Talk Pics. Let's get right into this one here. So we have an image, beautiful little image, kind of awkward if you look at certain people off in the corner, but that's okay. We have a beautiful image here of a wedding couple going for a little dip outside this neat little brewery here in Arizona. Nice little flare coming in from a light. I don't know if it's from my flash or a street light or what's going on, but it kind of looks cool. The mister's coming down. Just a lot of little things happening here. Some nice textures, some nice lines, different stuff going on. But can we make it better just using an adjustment of levels? Now, if you saw the last one when I was talking curves, you can go through image, adjustment, and then bring out the levels and go ahead and start doing some stuff and, bringing up those blacks there, just clipping it and clipping the whites, and what we get is a little bit more contrast. It kind of pushes that a little bit if we need it a little bit darker, a little bit brighter. You have some options in there, but what happens here is this all gets applied to our background layer, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to have it stuck on the layer like that. So another option is what we could do is create a new layer, or at least a copy of the layer rather. So copying that background layer, now we can go through image, adjustment, and do our levels and go ahead and make those changes here, and we get that contrast that we wanted. That's cool. And then just a touch brighter overall, and look at that, we're done. It looks amazing. Yay! That's terrible. Now, the effects of the levels is not terrible, but what's terrible is I can't do anything else. I can't go back and fix it. I can't change my mind. I can't undo. I mean, there's a few little things you can do. You can play with the opacity and just not as intense, or just this or whatever, but the reality is it's difficult to work around that kind of a change. So what we do, let me toss this layer out, and while we're down here, we go right over here. And this spot is create new fill or adjustment layer. Okay, so it's your adjustment layers that you can add on. Some of you will have it set up on your view in the window itself as a palette. I prefer to keep it this way just because it's nice and easy. Come down, find what I want, and select it. So we've chosen levels here, and now I can make those changes, similar. I'm not even looking at these numbers or anything, just kind of just feel all that, and look at that, that's nice, same kind of thing that we had before. And what it's doing is saying apply those levels adjustments to the image below, or at least the layer below. So if there's a bunch of layers, this would apply to the immediate layer below. And what we have going on there is the adjustment is being applied to our image in this case, but not in a destructive manner. So it's not actually on this layer. We have our background layer looks exactly the same as when we restarted, and then you turn on that levels adjustment layer, and now we have that. But let's say I don't like it. I can just double click right there, and now we can change it up a little bit. Maybe I wanted the darks to be, even clipped further, or I wanted the brights to be clipped further. Just really push that contrast in crazy ways, There's a lot of things you can do here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring us back just to the beginning here, okay? So the levels haven't really had any effect. It's just like a new adjustment layer, nothing on it, because we need to know something about levels. What you're doing here, especially when it's RGB, you are clipping information, and in here we can see our histogram. Now the histogram, just like up here, we can see the histogram, same kind of a trend, right? And then a little spike at the end, and that's probably, a little bit in her dress. Maybe it's these little bits here, these lights that are hot spots showing off there, and then this might be her dress, just that little bump coming up there. This is all those midtones happening, anything in between, maybe the skin tone, maybe some of the color stuff here, maybe some of the trees, some of this, the brick, and then we got a lot of that dark there, all these shadow areas here, even his clothing, that's dark sky because it's nighttime. So that's what we're seeing, is all the dark tones all the way up to the bright tones and everything in between. That's what the histogram is showing us. And in levels, we get an idea of the histogram in its totality. Now here, we can see it in different color formats. We see the green, we see the red, we can see cyan and blue, little magenta and yellow. There's all sorts of stuff that we can see the different levels happening there, the different histogram levels. But in our levels adjustment layer, we just get a overall reading of that trend line of where it's going from all the tones from dark to light. So a better way of thinking of this might be just to look at this in black and white, and we're just going to leave that on just to take a look, so that way we know that these over here are the darkest blacks, over here are the brightest whites, and we can see if this is the middle, there are much more dark tones there and even spiking way off there. Okay, so all the different darkness versus the lightness, and that's a good way to look at this just to kind of get an idea of what your histogram is trying to tell you. So I'm going to get rid of that just because we don't need the black and white layer. And then what Levels is going to do, at least at first, the options you have are, pulling in on the dark side here, and what we do is we call that clipping. So we're just going to clip off a section of the image, meaning if there's any information, why can't I just get this to 10? If there's any information happening, and there we go. If there's any information happening between the edge here and to where I've clipped it, it is now all set to the darkest possible tone, absolutely nothing, 0, right? There's nothing there. So I've clipped all that information. I've just made it this pure black tone. I can do the same thing on the bright side here and just clip it in. And what we're going to do is clip off some information and just take out a little bit there. It went from 255, we're going to go down to 245 just to clip it. So those bright spots, maybe over here that we had, end up being, sorry, what do we got? There we go. The bright spots here in the name, the signage here, or in those lights, maybe those were already pushing in that and we've clipped them off further. And you know what? It's okay. It's really not a big deal to clip things and have blowout whites or, deep dark blacks. It's depending on what you want out of the image and why. Okay, so why are we clipping this? Well, just if we turn it off, turn it back on, we can see it just bumps the contrast. If you can see it turning on and off, it bumps the contrast up just a little bit, right? And in doing so, you get a little bit more depth in things like the vegetation here. You get a little bit more clarity, or at least it looks to be clearer when we get to our subject there. Yeah, just a little bit more contrast to boost the overall image. Let's open back up and keep going here. So what we can do, there's a few other things, tons of other things you can do with Levels. We can brighten up from the dark side here, but we start getting flat and muddy over there on our output levels, and we can kind of bring down those highlights, and that gets really gray and gross, not really what I'm looking for in that kind of a highlight recovery. It can be used in plenty of situations, but for portraits it's just not as appealing. We can use this mid-tone and kind of persuade it to be a little bit more of those brighter tones being opened up and shown to us, and it just kind of brightens the image overall. Or we can darken it just a little bit and darken the image overall. I, for one, kind of like the little bit brighter here. And now we have a big difference just in using Levels, boosting that contrast, brightening it up, just making it pop. We didn't have to go very far, right? We just did a little bit in Levels to go from that beginning image over to here. And I think it's actually quite beautiful in that way. And what happens is those light areas where they were lit properly in the scene, but our bride and groom here lit properly, end up standing out even further. And then our background subjects over here, which are not supposed to be part of the image, but they're, passersby and onlookers to the scene, they kind of fall off in the darkness because the dark gets a little bit darker here, the bright gets a little bit brighter here, and it brings your eye a little bit closer to center more easily. We have enough elements kind of holding us back here that they're not so much of a distraction. If we wanted to, we could even go a step further and bring on another Levels layer. And this isn't exactly how I would go about with this, but we can bring on a Levels layer and end up darkening the image in a dramatic way, and then use the mask and go ahead and get rid of the spaces that we didn't want to affect in that way. So if I darken it, maybe it's just to make it so these people are a lot less distracting, but I don't want to lose everything else. So what I do is I take my brush tool and I make sure I'm on my mask layer here of the Levels. And right now I'm on white, so if I paint in white, it's going to be white on white. That does nothing because the white is saying show me everything that this adjustment layer is trying to do. But if we can flip it to a black brush, again, foreground over here is black now, we can start to paint in saying, show me everything except here. Oh, look at that. See how that turned black? So now we have this nice way of painting in where we want that levels adjustment to not be applied. Okay, in this case, sometimes you would do it in the way of applying it to a scene. Other times you do it in not applying it to the scene. And we can just use the soft edge of the brush that way. I'm pretty much okay with this whole side of the image here. And the top and all that. And that's great. You know, like, good stuff we got there. If I hold Alt on Windows, I think it's Option on Mac, and you can do, or Command maybe, I don't know, I'm sorry. But Alt on Windows, you can Alt click on the layer, the mask layer there itself. And you can see where you've painted black or where you're painting white. You know, in some cases you might want to just bring it back a little bit, you know, but it's easier to do it while you're looking at it. So I do actually want to bring some of this back over here because I kind of like that flare. Basically though, I went from having this darkening across the entire image to just darkening the people that aren't important. And yes, I'm losing the pillars and I'm losing another sign and all that stuff and some details in that way. But are they important? No. I think things that are more interesting are the structural details over here on the right side of the image being balanced by the weight of this sign kind of hanging over top, and we have that palm tree there, you know, towering above everything, you know, but still it's a nice, very simplistic image being centered of this little dip, and all we did was use levels. You can also use levels for a color correction. I don't know if we quite need to do that, but let's just let Photoshop kind of determine what we need to do and how we can go about it. So I'm not even going to work on this. What I'm going to do is let Photoshop decide for me, and how I'll do that is take on levels. Instead of RGB, I'm going to go to red. Then I'm going to grab one of these eyedroppers. This is looking for pure black. This is looking for pure white. This is looking for a gray point, a middle 128. Now it's hard to find any of these exactly in the frame. You know, is her dress pure white? I don't know. That looks even brighter white than her dress, so maybe not. But it's a neutral tone, okay? Is the sky pure dark black? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Hard to tell just looking at it. But what I do know is I can find a neutral tone, or what I want to be a neutral tone. So I'm going to go kind of in the middle of the dress here. Again, I'm on red, so this is going to shift it either red or cyan because they're complementary colors in light. And we're just going to grab the middle, and what that did was just a tiny, tiny bit. If you just look right over here, right under the logo, right on that wall. Look at how that cleans that up. You can start to see it down here. You turn it on and off a few times. It goes from kind of that glowing amber light to kind of looking natural. But we don't want to do it just to the reds. Let's do it to the greens as well. We've still got that eyedropper there. And we're just going to try to grab something what we feel is neutral. Again, it's just a guess of what we feel is neutral. I don't like that one. I think it took it too far. Just in what that did, you know, it went from here to here, and now, I don't know. It's hard to tell. So you can click again and say, give it another shot, or again and give it another shot, or again. And after a few clicks, it helps if I have the layer on. After a few clicks, you know, you can decide whether or not you like what it's doing or not, right? So it looks as I go further down this dress, it gets a little bit more intense, pushing in one way or another. I really feel like, you know, it's going to be off of taste. Yeah, we're getting into some neutral territory. Wow, it's like freaking out my eyes. I don't know what to do. That looks actually pretty good right there. So you can click around those neutral tones and give your best guess. It almost corrected what we did with the red. Weird. So maybe I didn't like the red. Let's see what the blue's giving us. Just a touch there. Now, I like that. I think that's the way to go here. It's very subtle, very simple on how this works, how this looks. Just that little bit of a yellow cast seems to disappear. Now, the eyedropper is fine. It's not very accurate. It's not very good to do it that way. And here we have just that middle moving one way or another, and you can kind of really see that shift happening there. So let me come over here and start giving it a better look that, you know what, a little bit of blue isn't gonna hurt us. little bit of green wood. Some of this stuff gets pretty funky. Do we want more red? Do we want less red? What do we want here? Maybe I don't want to mess with red. I don't know. Just a touch, you know, taking some of that hazy yellowing, some of that light out of there. Did it clean it up enough? It changes it. It's subtle. It's not a big deal. And really, it's just fine tuning. The thing is, you can do it with levels. Do you have to? I think there's many other ways to do it, but I just kind of want to show you that there's still other stuff you can do with levels rather than just changing the overall contrast and brightness or darkness of the image, although that would be my go-to for levels, just so it's those subtle adjustments. And then you have that option of just kind of bringing down some areas that are not as important, and then we have some color correction, which is fine. You know, you can kind of get away with that, but again, that's not how I would go about color correcting an image per se. But if we're doing it at just levels, the reality is in 3 different levels adjustments here from start to finish. So what we have there, pretty dramatic difference just using levels. Again, not exactly how I'd go about to edit this photo this way, but you can do a lot with levels, and I just wanted to walk you through some of that. But it's really cool to see where you can begin and get to something even better. I'm Rob Kruger, Take and Talk Pics.